In Buddhism, habitual mental patterns, sankharas or samskaras, represent deep-rooted tendencies that shape how we perceive and react to the world. These mental habits arise from repeated thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, often operating subconsciously. When left unchecked, they create a cycle of reactive behaviors that perpetuate dissatisfaction and suffering. Recognizing and breaking free from these patterns is essential to Buddhist practice, as they not only influence daily actions, but also contribute to the larger cycle of samsara, or repeated rebirths driven by ignorance and craving. According to Buddhism, habitual patterns emerge due to karma, intentional actions influenced by ignorance and craving. Each time we respond to a situation with a particular reaction, whether it's craving, anger, or attachment, the mind becomes conditioned to respond similarly in the future. These reactions create mental imprints or karmic seeds, making it more likely that similar circumstances will trigger the same responses again. Over time, these repetitive actions become ingrained as unconscious habits, shaping how we perceive and respond to the world. In dependent origination, paticcasamuppada, sankharas are depicted as the second link in the chain of causation, showing how habitual tendencies arise after ignorance and precede consciousness, perception, and contact. This means that mental habits influence how we experience the world even before we're aware of what's happening. For instance, a pattern of anger or judgment could lead us to interpret neutral or benign situations as negative or threatening, reinforcing the tendency to feel angry or judgmental. Habitual mental patterns are one of the primary causes of dukkha, suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, because they create fixed, reactive responses rather than allowing a flexible, open approach to life. For example, when we cling to pleasant experiences or resist unpleasant ones, these responses reinforce the sense of a stable, separate self that needs to protect and satisfy itself. The belief in a solid, unchanging I or me makes us feel vulnerable to external conditions and reactive to emotions. By identifying with these patterns, we continually reinforce them, which in turn strengthens the cycle of craving, aversion, and ignorance. In this way, habitual patterns contribute directly to the cycle of samsara, binding us to repetitive cycles of unsatisfactory existence. The liberation from habitual mental patterns involves cultivating awareness and mindfulness. Buddhist practice, especially through meditation, teaches us to observe the arising of thoughts, emotions, and habitual reactions without reacting to them. When we become aware of a habitual reaction, such as an impulse to become angry, crave, or criticize, we learn to pause, observe, and notice it without identifying with it. Over time, this awareness weakens the habitual force behind these reactions, allowing for more intentional and skillful responses. In Buddhism, there are several practical methods for addressing and transforming habitual patterns. Mindfulness, sati. By bringing awareness to each moment, we can observe when habitual patterns arise and create a mental space that allows us to respond rather than react. Mindfulness reveals the impermanent and conditioned nature of our thoughts and reactions, showing that we don't need to be controlled by them. Right effort, sama vayama. This practice involves cultivating wholesome states and discouraging unwholesome ones. When we notice a negative pattern arising, we can replace it with a more skillful response. For example, we might replace anger with patience or judgment with compassion. Meditative concentration, samadhi. Concentration practices stabilize the mind, making it less susceptible to being pulled by every thought or emotion. This stability allows practitioners to see habitual patterns clearly and relate to them with equanimity rather than attachment or aversion. Wisdom, panya. Insight practices, such as vipassana, help us see deeply into the nature of our habitual patterns. When we truly understand that these patterns are not permanent or inherent aspects of ourselves, we can begin to let go of identification with them, reducing their influence over our thoughts and actions. Cultivation of positive qualities, practicing loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha, gradually replaces negative habits with positive, wholesome qualities that lead to greater peace and well-being. These qualities encourage us to see others and ourselves with empathy rather than judgment, shifting habitual reactions into compassionate responses. It's important to recognize that habitual patterns are deeply ingrained, often developed over a lifetime, and change requires patience. Buddhist teachings emphasize that liberation is a gradual path, and transformation comes with consistent effort. By observing and understanding these patterns with patience, we create the conditions for them to naturally weaken and eventually fall away. Ultimately, freedom from habitual patterns leads to liberation, nibbana. When the mind is no longer bound by reactions, it experiences a state of unconditioned peace and freedom. This is the cessation of dukkha, where the mind abides in equanimity and is free from the attachments, cravings, and aversions that fuel the cycle of rebirth. As habitual patterns dissolve, the practitioner comes to see that thoughts and emotions are fleeting, not self, and no longer identify with them as part of an I or mine. In this liberated state, a person can live with complete openness and freedom, responding to each moment with compassion and wisdom, unconditioned by past habits. This freedom from habitual mental patterns is not just a personal liberation, but a path that fosters greater compassion, understanding, and kindness toward others. In Buddhism, sati, or mindfulness, is the practice of bringing present moment awareness to our experiences without judgment or reaction. When applied to habitual mental patterns, mindfulness enables us to observe these patterns as they arise without automatically engaging with them. This observation is not passive, it's a conscious, skillful attention that allows us to notice our impulses, whether to react with anger, desire, or aversion, and to pause rather than react. The beauty of mindfulness lies in its non-judgmental quality. Instead of labeling our reactions as bad or wrong, mindfulness encourages us to view them simply as passing mental phenomena, arising and dissolving like waves on the surface of the mind. For instance, when anger arises, mindfulness allows us to acknowledge, "This is anger," without immediately becoming caught up in it. By doing so, we depersonalize the emotion, seeing it as a conditioned response rather than a permanent or essential part of who we are. A central challenge with habitual mental patterns is that they often feel automatic, leaving little space between a triggering event and our reaction to it. For example, someone may say something critical, and we instantly feel anger or defensiveness, as though it were an inevitable response. Through consistent mindfulness practice, however, we begin to notice a space between the event and our reaction, however small it may be. In that space lies the opportunity to choose a different response. When we observe a habitual impulse, like a desire to criticize, seek validation, or crave, we practice not identifying with it. This means that instead of thinking, "I am angry," we simply observe, "There is anger arising." This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in perception, helping us to see that emotions and reactions are not personal, permanent parts of our identity, but rather passing mental states. By not identifying with them, we weaken their power over us. Mindfulness creates a gradual weakening of the habitual force behind conditioned reactions. Every time we observe a reaction without engaging in it, we interrupt its usual pathway, breaking the cycle of automatic behavior. For example, each time we feel the urge to criticize someone, but pause instead of speaking, we weaken that critical habit. With time and practice, habitual impulses lose their grip, and we become more grounded in our ability to respond rather than react. Furthermore, mindfulness doesn't just allow us to interrupt these patterns, but also helps us understand their underlying causes. We might start to see, for instance, that our impulse to criticize stems from insecurity, or that anger arises from a feeling of inadequacy. By seeing these patterns clearly, we are better equipped to address their root causes and replace them with more skillful, compassionate responses. As we continue practicing mindfulness, the mind becomes less reactive and more calm and stable. In this space of calm, we can make conscious, intentional choices about how to respond to situations. Instead of letting anger dictate our behavior, we can choose patience. Instead of craving, we can cultivate contentment. Over time, these new responses become habits in themselves, replacing old, unhelpful patterns with wholesome and beneficial ones. This process doesn't mean we repress emotions or avoid addressing difficult situations. Rather, it enables us to engage with life from a place of clarity and compassion, choosing actions that align with our values rather than habitual impulses. Through mindfulness, we gain control over our minds, liberating ourselves from reactive behaviors and moving closer to the peace and freedom that Buddhist practice promises. In essence, breaking free from habitual mental patterns is an ongoing journey that requires patience, commitment, and self-compassion. By cultivating awareness and practicing non-reactivity, we train ourselves to respond skillfully to each moment, nurturing a mind that is free from the grip of past conditioning and open to the present with clarity and kindness. Thank you for joining me on this journey and being a part of it.